1914 saw the outbreak of war in Europe. It was to become known as the Great War. Few people in 1914 could have foreseen that it would last for 4 years and bring 4 years of the most appalling death and devastation that Europe had ever known. Oddly enough, in 1914, as the outbreak of war came closer, there was great euphoria and enthusiasm for it. They couldn't wait to get into it. And young men all over Europe saw the war as a great chance for adventure. Join the army, see the world. They saw the war as an opportunity to get away from the ordinary, the humdrum, the boring aspects of their lives. And many of them, though of course not all, joined for that reason. 300,000 Irishmen went off to fight in the Great War. 50,000 of them were never to come back.
I joined up with the others to see the world, but I didn't have the money for the pay for seeing the world, so the only way I could do it was the way they did it.
All my pals were going. The half of Dublin went to that.
There was a big strike on when Larkin strike was on.
Yes.
And there was no work to be got. So he said, I'll join up, he said, because he says, we have no means to pay our accommodation. And he went away then to the war.
The simplest answer is that they went for faith, they went for fatherland, they went for king and country. But even within this island, actually, there were different reasons for why they went when we look at it under those headings of king and country, faith and fatherland. I think Protestant Ulster went in order to maintain a union, and Catholic Ireland went in order to break a union. And in the course of it, they acted, in retrospect, foolishly, because they were putting their trust in empire masters, and they had not learned the lesson that the empire could never be trusted to give exactly what they wanted.
And so, to yet another classical Irish paradox, the Ulster Unionists, fearful that an Irish Home Rule Bill would be passed in the House of Commons, opened a campaign which left nobody in doubt about their utter determination to maintain the union with England. Led by Sir Edward Carson, they established a fighting unit of 100,000 men, the Ulster Volunteer Force, to defend Ulster if need be. Overtaken by the outbreak of war, Unionists joined the British Army to fight to preserve the Union and thereby defeat the Home Rule Bill. Meantime, John Redmond, pushing ahead with the Home Rule Bill in the Commons, was halted by the outbreak of war. Acting on advice and half-promises, he was persuaded that once the war was over and provided he cooperated, the bill would be passed and Home Rule achieved. Understandably, he exhorted Irishmen to join up and fight to end the war quickly. So we had the paradox that while Unionists were fighting to maintain the Union, Nationalists were fighting to break it and get Home Rule. Yet in the 4 years of war, Unionists and Nationalists fought and died alongside each other as comrades. Irish regiments came from all over the country, and many of them fought on several fronts. Of course, there was no question of conscription, but there was a very strong and very successful recruitment campaign. It's also worth remembering that even before the war started, many Irishmen were already serving as professional soldiers in some of these famous Irish regiments. But the war swelled the ranks, and men of all walks of life joined up.
The most important question, I think, is why did they stay? And I think they stayed for each other. They were fighting ultimately for each other.
It was very upsetting, and you never know when you get a notification to say your husband was killed. You know, you were always waiting for the post to come to see what's wrong. You know.
I have to inform you with much regret that your son, number 16882, Private J. Harvey of my battalion, is missing since the Battle of July 1st. Every possible inquiry has been made, but without result. And I fear there can now be little doubt but that he fell on that occasion. Please accept the sincere sympathy of all ranks in the battalion in your sorrow.
In 1919, a group of people came together in Dublin with the idea of erecting a lasting memorial to the Irishmen who died in the 1914 war. Many suggestions were put forward. They were going to put a memorial in Merrion Square. They were going to erect a shelter for visiting soldiers and sailors, a place where they might stay passing through Dublin. Many suggestions put forward and rejected. But eventually, after 16 years, because things moved very slowly in Ireland at that time, after 16 years and after much negotiation with both the De Valera and Cosgrave governments, the group of 1919 were given the go-ahead for a permanent memorial to the war dead, the Irish War Memorial, at a place called Long Meadows on the south bank of the River Liffey, close to the Phoenix Park. When I was growing up, we made great use of the Phoenix Park. We went to it all the time. And every time, getting from where I lived to the Phoenix Park, we had to pass by the Memorial Park here at Island Bridge. And after the initial glory and enthusiasm of its opening, when I was growing up, it had fallen into disuse. It was uncared for, it was neglected, it was quite unsightly. It was a home for wandering horses and a target for every vandal and graffiti merchant in the area. And now here I am on a glorious June day in glorious June 1988 in Ireland, in the Memorial Park at Island Bridge, restored, renovated, maintained once again. Something to the standard of that group in 1919 who wanted to erect a permanent, lasting Irish National War Memorial to the 49,400 Irishmen who gave their lives in the Great War.
Park was the idea of President W.T. Cosgrave. He, through the Irish government, donated this land, the Long Meadows estate at Inchicore and Island Bridge, to the Memorial Committee. The actual Garden of Remembrance is 20 acres in the centre of the park. The total park is approximately 150 acres, which extends from Island Bridge to Chapel Lizard. The first 2 years and £50,000, which was donated by the Irish government, was spent on laying out the parkway. And then from 1931 on, the men moved in to erect the Garden of Remembrance, which was designed by Sir Edward Lutyens. He was commissioned to do it.
From the time the first committee was formed in 1919, to the final opening of the park, it seems to be an extraordinary length of time. Why was that?
Because they wanted to give employment, and it was done by hand. It's as simple as that. In those days there were no bulldozers and fancy machinery, and the men with their shovels and wheelbarrows excavated this site and laid it out. Incidentally, it is a very old site from an archaeological point of view. It was a Viking burial ground. When the Great Southern and Western Railway was being constructed in the 1850s time, they discovered Viking remains. And in the 1930s, when this place was being excavated, they discovered a lot more Viking remains. Graves, swords, vessels, that type of thing. And they are now to be seen in the National Museum. It was all constructed by hand by ex-servicemen from both armies. Approximately 50% British Army and 50% the National Army. And of course, the stonework, as designed by Lutyens, was done by the stonemasons in Barnacollier in County Dublin and Ballynockin in County Wicklow. And all the work here is hand cut. All this granite work is entirely done by hand.
To his specifications.
To his specification, yes.
Magnificent work, is it not?
Yes, well, it's reckoned to be the finest example of the Irish stonemason's craft in Ireland. And the dry stone walls, which you see behind you over there, they were made by a team of wall builders led by a man from Mayo, who is reputed to have been an absolute genius. And that is reckoned to be the finest example of dry stone walling in existence.
So there was £50,000 given at that time by the then Irish government, and then the rest was raised?
The rest was raised by public subscription from the people of the 32 counties. This is a national war memorial. At that time, of course, it was all one country. That was before partition, and the money came from every county of Ireland. And £56,000 was the completed price of this memorial.
56,000?
Yes.
What would be your intention about how the park should be used?
As a public park for the people of the area here. It's as simple as that, because naturally the First World War men are nearly all gone. How many are left? Very, very few. Even the Second World War men, which doesn't concern, but they're all dying off. So consequently it will become and is the property of the people of Dublin, and the people of Ireland, I should say, because the people of Ireland put up the money for it. It's as simple as that.
Architect Sir Edwin Lutyens, renowned for his work in places like India, France and Britain, got the job of designing the Irish National War Memorial Park in Dublin. It was to be one of his finest achievements.
His early reputation was based on these very beautiful houses, which were not classical. They were based on, if you like, a vernacular tradition, a tradition of building with, Lambay Castle is our most famous one in Ireland, a tradition of uniting houses with the landscape, beautiful gardens, beautiful materials, romantic roof shapes and so on. And in his later career, towards, say, 1916 onwards, Lutyens began to look back at the classical tradition. And that's where everybody saw that Lutyens had sold out. He'd actually sold out to the 19th century. He'd gone back and they promptly dismissed him. And of course, the facts were that they didn't understand what Lutyens was doing with classical architecture, because Lutyens did all sorts of wonderful things with classical architecture, which made it his own.
Looking around us here now, Sean, what would you say are the distinguishing characteristics of Lutyens that people would admire?
Well, this constructive use of geometry, if you like. Almost everywhere Lutyens uses straight geometries, circles, squares, rectangles, axes, cutting this way and cutting the other way. But he didn't use them in a sort of a mechanical way. He used them in a very interesting way. I mean, this place we're sitting in now is a sunken circle. He will use other circles which are raised up with steps.
And is that a standard war stone in the centre?
Yes, almost all of his memorials and cemeteries had, I think he called it the war stone or the memorial stone, and had specific measurements. He laid out exactly what the measurements of it were, the height of it, the proportions. It was up on a certain number of steps. It had this little curved piece at the bottom and at the plinth, and the stone itself actually wasn't straight-edged. It was slightly battered, he wrote something about this, that if you connected, if you drew the line straight up into the air, they would meet at a point maybe 1,000 feet up into the sky. That was again a kind of a Lutyens instruction.
How many war cemeteries and memorials did he design altogether?
I think he designed something like 980 cemeteries, and dozens of war memorials, monuments to the missing, and a few like this, which is designed really as a garden rather than as an architectural monument, although it has architecture in it. But he conceived this really as a garden. Lutyens hated war, and he was quite strong about the fact that his memorials did not commemorate war, they did not celebrate victory, they wouldn't have had guns or bronze soldiers. The idea was that they celebrated the dead and the sacrifice of the dead, and that they also re-established an order from the kind of barbarism and disorder of war. He saw classical architecture as bringing this kind of quality back into a memorial for the dead.
Now, I suppose his idea here, Sean, would have been an idea of peace and tranquility in this enclosed garden.
Yeah, this is Lutyens using the ideas of classical architecture to impose, if you like, a sense of order on a space. And the space is enclosed by different elements like walls, pavilions. But again, the ambiguities come into this, that he allows you to have views outside the space through the open pergolas, and also towards the frontier with the views of the park in the background.
Yes, the open pergola at either end, and then that big gap there in the wall to look out towards the Phoenix Park, and then these individual gates at odd places.
That's right. They're just, again, to give you opening views. And again, Lutyens, one of the great things that Lutyens did was he had these cross axes. He had an axis down that way with a view, and another one through this gateway, and through each of the gateways there's some kind of a different view of some sort. The arms of the cross are cut off, and I think my theory of that is to increase the sense of perspective, because actually the cross looks higher than it actually is. He also, of course, pushes it up on top of a big flight of semicircular granite steps.
Now, what would have been his idea about the fountain, Sean?
Well, again, the fountain, the water, the use of water in landscape architecture was to provide two things, or three things actually: the feeling of tranquility when it's still reflections. The other thing interesting about this particular fountain is it's a very large-scale circle, another favourite device of Lutyens, the circle. And he goes further. If you look at the plans of this particular fountain, he has taken from a central point of the circle, scribing in the floor of the fountain to create a kind of very interesting pattern, and not a classical pattern, again, a kind of, again, a Lutyens interpretation of a pattern.
It's one of the finest pieces of civic design that Sir Edwin Lutyens ever completed. It's far more extensive than any of the war memorials on the British mainland. It's comparable in scale to the remarkable memorials that he did in northern France.
Talk to me about the volumes of the names of the dead here in the book room, Campbell.
Well, after the war in 1919, when the committee was set up, they decided that there should be a full list of all the Irish dead. And a list was compiled at great expense, I might add, from all over Ireland. And there are now 8 volumes of names containing the 49,400 names of the people who were killed. And they are in these 8 volumes, which are here in the bookcases, and they're in alphabetical order. There are great interest to people coming out to the park here because they can look up their relatives. As we've mentioned recently, there are a lot of burns there.
Pages and pages of burns, yes.
And 100 sets of volumes were made.
Of these books?
Of these books. There are 8 volumes in each set, and they were distributed all over the world.
And I only noticed today that the border illustrations for the books were done by Harry Clark.
That is correct. As you know, he was a famous Irish stained glass man, and they're absolutely beautiful. They depict all sorts of scenes from the trenches in France.
Superb job. Now, across in the other house, speak to me about the Ginchy Cross.
Well, now that Ginchy Cross that is over in the other house there was erected on the Somme in February 1917. It commemorates the Battle of Guillemont and Ginchy, which took part on the 3rd of September at Guillemont and on the 9th of September at Ginchy. The 16th Irish Division stormed the village and captured it. General Sir William Hickey, he was a Tipperary man, he commanded the division. He had that cross made from a balk of elm from a ruined French farmhouse. It was made by the division pioneers. It stood on the Somme between the villages of Guillemont and Ginchy from 1917 until 1926. In 1926, it was deemed that it wouldn't last much longer, and an Irish granite cross made from granite from the Dublin Mountains was taken out there and erected in its place.
And that is the actual cross?
That is the actual cross that stood on the Somme. It stood for 9 years on the Somme, and then it was brought back to Ireland, and this is its final resting place.
And that place, Ginchy, I presume that would be just a nondescript little village. What do they get out of all of those deaths and wounds?
Well, literally nothing. They advanced a few hundred yards, and thousands of men were killed.
Do you remember the dark months you held the sector at Nanette's? The nights you watched and wired and dug and piled sandbags on parapets? Do you remember the rats and the stench of corpses rotting in front of the front-line trench? And dawn coming, dirty white and chill with a hopeless rain. Do you ever stop and ask, is it all going to happen again? Do you remember that hour of din before the attack, and the anger, the blind compassion that seized and shook you then as you peered at the doomed and haggard faces of your men? Do you remember the stretcher cases lurching back with dying eyes and lolling heads? Those ashen grey masks of the lads who once were keen and kind and gay. Have you forgotten yet? Look up and swear by the green of the spring that you'll never forget.
I was 17 when the war broke out. I spent my 18th birthday in the trenches. That was 1914, see. But this fellow MacDonald, I remember he was a real handsome man. He was a recruiting sergeant. And you see, the others had gone. They're all talking about the far horizons, you know, see the world and all that kind of thing. We didn't have money to see the world, had to see it in the army, you see. And I told him, he was a good guy, really. He said, well, listen, he said, you join in your mother's maiden name. He said, but only when he comes down there in Gordon for camels. Well, there isn't any camels, see. So I thought that was a good idea, so I joined them.
And what do you mean the others had gone? Your other brothers, do you know?
Yeah,
How many?
they'd all gone. They'd all gone. The Far Horizon was calling them.
How many of them?
There were 5 of us.
Yeah.
5 of us. Pat, he was blown up at Vimy Ridge. He was with the Royal Engineers. Joe, he was a machine gunner with the Irish Guards. He got through. Michael, he was the oldest. He was a battery sergeant major B battery, the Royal Canadian Horse Artillery. We were on the 1914-18 war.
Yeah.
And myself, I was with the Black Watch. I got gassed at Moreland Court on the Somme. And that was the 5 of us.
And where are they?
They're all dead. Jeez, I'm the only one around.
Over the top, the main trouble was to get a hole in the barbed wire, in your own barbed wire, to get through, to get across, without the jerry spotting, you see. And the main thing they were looking for was to get a couple of fellas, capture a couple, bring them back, so as we could get information out of them as to who were there and the numbers were there. And hand them over then to the red caps or somebody else, they'd take them back down, you see.
And I presume an awful lot of your companions were shot or killed.
Oh, I'd say we'd lost. Well, the night I was hit, there was 45 went well. We'd been relieved by the Enniskillens. He lobbed it through the roof.
It was sheer bloody punishment. It was sheer punishment. A lot of people don't know that we went hungry very often, and I'll tell you why. It was in the early days of trench warfare. Now, there was no fault of our supply columns. In the early days of the trench warfare, at night time in the trenches, if there wasn't a lot of shelling going on, we could hear the transport behind the German lines moving around, bringing up the supplies to the trenches and the rations and that kind of thing, and they could hear it behind our lines. That was the signal for the bloody artillery on both sides to open up and blast them off the roads. And then about 9 or 10 o'clock at night, they were going, sorry lads, no rations tonight, transport couldn't get through. Well now, try and visualise, you're wet, you're cold, you're hungry, and you've got to go all that night and you've got to go all the next day before you get a chance of getting something to eat. You couldn't light a fire to warm yourself or to dry your clothes or anything like that. You're in an open trench. Hail, rain, frost and snow. Try and visualise in a comfortable home what it's like to be like that. For Christ's sake, no wonder we went mad.
Twice I put my hand in my pocket. Put my hand on a rat.
In your pocket?
In my pocket, yeah. To climb all over, you see. So eventually, when we got used to it, one fellow was always detailed with his rifle and bayonets, fully loaded, when he was down on the ground in the trenches, to stick them or shoot them, for the sake of, well, the other fellows got a few hours sleep. You know what I mean? Because otherwise he'd be so terrified of the piece. And the food, unless you had an old tin box around, you'd hear them tearing it open, you know.
And would they crawl over you while you were asleep?
They would crawl over you. Search your pockets for grub. But the main trouble with the rats was the fire step. You were lying there, you were down there. I was number 1 of machine gun, the Lewis gun team. And they were popping across in one all the time, you see. And often, when things were quiet, I often, with a revolver, shot a rat when you took some doing.
Did you get home at all?
I did get home in 1915. All the fellas that was out from Mons got 7 days leave in 1915.
And did you ever think, when you were on leave, did you ever think of doing a bunk?
Never entered my brain. I'd say that quite truthfully. It never entered my brain.
Why?
I suppose discipline. I suppose that was it, discipline.
Well, it was a thing that you'd be letting your pals, your country and everything down if you did.
We shared our last cigarette. We shared our last bite of food. We shared our lives because we were willing to sacrifice our life, take a risk of losing our life to help a chum. I mean, that was a recognised thing.
There was a great element of love between men, male love. And that is something that I think has been devalued and should be remembered. For these men did fight for each other because they loved each other, and that's important.
What about the Germans you killed? Did you ever think about them?
No.
Why?
No. Why should I think about them? They bloody well didn't think about me. No, blood. Oh, boy, that's another one gone. Ha ha, good. That was the attitude.
Yeah.
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 That was the attitude. And any one of us, that was the attitude. I got that sod.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
You
yet
didn't
they,
care whether he was the father of a family or what the hell he was. It didn't interest you. What you were didn't interest him. Kill or be killed. I mean, war is war. It's a dirty business.
That's right.
You read that in my memoirs.
That's right. That's right.
The bloody lice, the rats and everything else. Yeah, you see the bloody rats out there gorging themselves on the body of a pal of yours that's dead. You know what I mean? But you've got to live with it. There's nothing you can do about it. It's war. War isn't it? It's a filthy business.
And looking back on it now, Jack, was it all worthwhile?
Looking back on my life, I mean, what has happened to me down through the years, whether that has been worthwhile or not, I would do the same again, because as well as being bad times, there were good times. I mean, I'm talking to you now. Last week I was talking to the Queen Mother. Do you know how I felt when I was talking to the Queen Mother? I felt that I would really willingly have given my life to have saved her brother's life. That's the way I felt talking to her. And nobody like me to be talking to somebody like that and explaining to her the circumstances under which I saved her brother's life. I mean, try and look at it from my point of view, Guy.
Oh, certainly, I understand. But looking back on the days of war, looking back on it now, do you think that it was all a period of madness and insanity?
Of course, war is madness. Of course it's mad. You've got to be mad to take part in war. If I was to give you a rifle now and go and say, shoot him, you should say, you're bloody mad. What's wrong with you? But in war, you do it, and you get a kick out of doing it. So you must be mad. You're not in your saying. You're not saying.
I promise St. John to you, I'd never forget him every day my husband home said to me, because I really loved him. I was very fond of him.
And did I hear that he used to wake up with bad dreams?
He used to wake up, yes, he used to think he was in the war, you see, and he used to wake up and he used to say, you hide under the pillows. And sometimes you get out of bed and you go under the bed to hide, afraid that they were coming after or catching him. And I used to get afraid, I used to think that he was taking a fit. I was very upset over it. I had a terrible time with the worry over him, you know.
And he never spoke about it?
Never spoke. I want to forget all about it, he said to me. Don't speak about it. So we never used to talk about it at all.
I think it had heightened their awareness of life lost, and it had broadened their compassion. But most terrifyingly, I think they realized that the ultimate dream of the First World War, which would be that it would be the war to end all wars, they knew there could be no such war.
As Kipling said, we shall not grow old like you who are left grow old. And when I think of them lovely pals of mine that's gone, my own brothers that was killed and that kind of thing, I see that young smiling faces. They'll never grow old and wrinkle like me. I see their young smiling faces.
And good fellas.
A grand lot of lads there were. A grand lot of lads.
There's a couple of brothers of mine, their names is over there in the book. I'm glad for them. I'm glad for the other lads I knew that made the supreme sacrifice. Look, Gay, when I come to think of what it's like now with the North and the South, I mean, you know my feelings about that. There we were, the North and the South, loving, good friends, good pals, fighting for a cause that we all believed in. And now here we are at each other's throats.
Well, we know there are mixed feelings about the war monument at Island Bridge, and we know that the source of those mixed feelings is that we may feel that in preserving it, even in allowing it to stand, it is in some way an insult to the memory of the nationalist dead, a grievance against them. But I think we have to learn from history, and we have to learn that a sense of grievance has brought nothing but further war to this country. And as far as I'm concerned, those who died in the Great War died for peace, and that monument is a monument for peace and for hope, and we should preserve it and look after it and make sure that future generations learn from it.
Despite all the effort of designing and building this beautiful park, neglect eventually came upon it like some wasting disease.
1978-79, right up to 1980, until the committee got going again, the place was in a terrible state here. It was open, of course. There were stray horses everywhere, and of course horses like to scratch themselves, and they knocked down pillars here. That centre pillar over there was knocked down by a joyrider in a motor car. He smashed into it and knocked it down and got up and ran away and left it there. The lily ponds were all full of debris. The roses and all the flowers were gone. The trees were broken down. The Dutch elm disease killed all the elms on the main avenue. They were all gone, and the stumps were there. It was a scene of absolutely dilapidation.
In keeping with Lutyens' design for a symbol of peace and tranquility, what better flower to have than a rose? And what more appropriate in this park than a rose called Peace?
Peace was first bred by Francis Mellon, and in France it was originally known as Madame A. Mellon, but it was bred in 1935, and as the war approached in 1939 it was spread over Europe, and spread to Germany and Italy, and it was first introduced in Britain in 1942, and then to the States. But in 1945, when the war was coming to an end, they decided to change the name to Peace in America, and it's reckoned to be one of the best roses produced this century.
Apart from Peace, Una, how many other varieties of roses have you here?
There's over 20 different varieties here now, and we couldn't get the original varieties that were planted, were originally intended for here, but we got colour substitutes, and we hope then eventually that we'll bud up some of the old varieties and we'll replace them as and when we can get them. So we'll have really a replica of the way it was. It's an unusual park. It's on quite a steep slope. Slopes down from Concorbett Road right down to the Liffey, and you get this lovely change of perspective as you move around the park, with the different vistas formed, and it's really attractive. It's quite an unusual feature of the park.
And it goes right down
to the Liffey. It's probably one of the few places that you can really, within the city bounds, to get down right to the Liffey base.
While the memorial commemorates those who died in the Great War, those who survived were not forgotten either. To this very day, Leopardstown Park Hospital, now managed by a board appointed by our Irish Minister for Health, is the home of these veterans, and they'll be cared for and minded there for as long as they live.
In 1917, Gertrude Frances Power, the widow of Sir James Power of Whisky renown, left the hospital to the Ministry of Pensions for the care of Irish men disabled in the First World War. The war at the time was at its height, and there were many Irishmen coming home disabled, and they had really nowhere of their own to stay and to be cared for.
Now, gradually, presumably, as they died out, other people were allowed to come to the hospital. Tell me about those developments.
Well, in the 30s, the hospital was full, and gradually coming up to 1960 and 70, the numbers of pensioners began to decline, and the managers of the hospital were rather worried about the cost, and so they decided to approach the Department of Health here. And in 1974, first of all, there was an arrangement made with Vincent's Hospital to allow convalescent patients to come here. And then in 1979, an agreement was formed to allow the ordinary people of Dublin to come to the hospital and be treated here.
So how many Irish veterans of the First World War would you have in residence now?
There are 20 now. We have 110 beds. There are 80 elderly Dubliners, and there are 20 pensioners, and of course you know that the pensioners still have a right of admission here. That is the primary right of the hospital here. When the pensioners have the right of admission over and above anyone else, but we care for them alongside the Eastern Health Board patients.
At 3 o'clock on the afternoon of Saturday the 10th of September 1988, there was a service of dedication and blessing of the Irish National War Memorial. Speeches were made, a bugle sounded, prayers were recited, blessings were given, a wreath was laid, a moment's silence was observed, and those present remembered and prayed for the 49,400 Irishmen who gave their lives in the Great War of 1914-1918.
The memorial was to have been officially opened by President de Valera in 1939, but owing to the outbreak of the Second World War, the ceremony never took place. For many years, the British Legion, later the Royal British Legion, held our Remembrance Day parades here. But we were obliged to give this up in 1971 for security reasons. I feel sure that this splendid memorial will never again be allowed to fall into neglect and disrepair. It is, in fact, quite the finest war memorial in these islands. There is nothing in the United Kingdom to compare with it. It is appropriate that its restoration should have been completed in Dublin's millennium year. The city may well be proud of such a splendid amenity. I have stressed the point that the memorial is as much the property of Northern Ireland as it is of the Republic. I think, therefore, that it would be appropriate that we should hear from them this afternoon, and I now ask Admiral Sir Arthur Heslett to say a few words.
We are, of course, greatly honored by being asked to be present here today. But, as Colonel Boydell has already indicated, we feel to a certain extent that we have a right to be here. As a member of a family who have lived in Ireland in the same house for 200 years and have served in the forces for the last 3 generations, I'm very proud to be here today.
To the glory of God, in the faith of Jesus Christ, we dedicate, bless, and hallow this memorial cross with the garden of remembrance sacred to the memory of some 50,000 Irishmen who died in the war of 1914 to 1918. Their name liveth forevermore. Amen.
Amen.
I would ask you all to stand for the silence in memory of the fallen.
I'm sorry that it didn't take place 50 years ago, and I'm sorry that it's taken so long for people to come around to commemorating the Irish fallen of the Great War. I'm delighted that we are a step closer to recognizing the actual facts of history and not the myths.
The people who were being commemorated here were people who died in war, and what we must try and stop is war.
I don't suppose all of them were heroes, but they did their duty as it was defined for them at the time. Many of them, well, all those men lost their lives in the process. And I think that it is part of our history, and it will be a part of our history that will be very neglectful of us if we overlooked.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. We will remember them.
I told you at the beginning of this program that when I was growing up in this area as a boy, we knew the Irish National War Memorial simply as the Memorial Park, to distinguish it from the Phoenix Park across the river. At that time, it had fallen into a state of neglect and disrepair and vandalism, and so it is with considerable satisfaction to so many people that it is dedicated today in the state originally intended for it. And it's also wonderful to think that it now comes under the care of the Office of Public Works in perpetuity, with a permanent staff to make sure that it is kept in a perfect state. It belongs, the Irish National War Memorial, to all the people of Ireland, and it's here available for everybody to come and visit. If you haven't done so far, I'd strongly recommend that you do come sometime and see it and experience the peace and tranquility of it, because peace and tranquility were very much in the minds of those who first designed it. Peace and tranquility as an antidote to the horror and the noise and the stench of war. And when you do come here, spare a thought for the 49,400 Irishmen from all parts of Ireland who died in the First World War and who are commemorated here. They were told when they were going out to fight in 1914 that they were fighting a war to end all wars. That's what they were told, and undoubtedly that's what they believed. When you come here, think of them.
Look up and swear by the green of the spring that you'll never forget.